Welcome to this channel. Sometimes I write drunk and revise sober, and sometimes I write sober and revise drunk. But you have to have both elements in creation. Peter de Vries. Creativity isn't just one mood or one moment. It's a dance between different mental states, from generating ideas, doing research, exploring possibilities, recharging your mind, polishing work, and even the boring admin side of creation. These mental states shape how art really gets done, not just inspiration alone. The 7 mental states of creative work. Sometimes I write drunk and revise sober, and sometimes I write sober and revise drunk. But you have to have both elements in creation. Creativity isn't just one mood or one moment. It's a dance between different mental states, from generating ideas, doing research, exploring possibilities, recharging your mind, polishing work, and even the boring admin side of creation. These mental states shape how art really gets done, not just inspiration alone. The 7 mental states of creative work. Sometimes I write drunk and revise sober, and sometimes I write sober and revise drunk. But you have to have both elements in creation. I know the way by heart now. Descend at the stairs from Michigan Avenue. From the plaza below street level, escape the stabbing wind through the revolving door. As I unbutton my wool car coat, I turn left, then right, then walk past the gift shop. The attendant scans my membership card and directs me to the front of the line of tourists. With each step, the spaces get smaller and darker, and I get farther from the busy sidewalks and honking taxis. The elevator is full. An older man with a camera around his neck and his wife speak to each other in German. A mother with 3 kids wears a Michigan t-shirt and grips the handles of a fragile stroller. A family of 5 discusses the oldest son's college choices. A pre-recorded message reminds me once again this is the fastest elevator in North America. But I wish it were faster. I'm filled with a feeling of unease, as if something important yet unknown is left undone. The doors slide open to blinding brightness. The breeze from the pressure differential propels me as I step out onto the 95th floor. As my eyes adjust, the brightness gives way to Lake Michigan on my left, a giant horizon of blue, and scattered toy buildings on my right. I rest my forehead on the window for a minute and stare down at the tiny cars on the tiny street. I hear nothing but a soft hum where the sounds of car horns and engines used to be. I sit at a table at the corner cafe with a 180-degree view of downtown Chicago. I see Sears Tower. I see Trump Towers, still under construction. I see Water Tower Place, the Allerton Hotel, and, to the west, a flat horizon that never ends. I pour sparkling water into a short glass of ice with a wedge of lemon. I take a sip, and I sigh. My chest is jumping, my heart getting whiplash within my suddenly stationary body. I let the buildings and the horizon close in on me, and I wait. Within minutes, it starts to come. But I don't want to scare it away, so I move slowly and deliberately. I remove my black moleskin notebook from my bag, and I wait. I place the notebook on the table, and I wait. I remove the pen cap from its keeping place under the elastic band. I wait. I open the notebook, and I wait. I remove the pen cap, and I wait. Finally, I begin to write. The words start off disorganized, a string of nonsense, every little thing that's on my mind, copyright permissions, Chapter 5 illustrations, color science research, and on and on. Then it starts to build into longer and more focused passages. As I explore the rankings of one thought versus another, my heart calms. Tasks that felt impossible begin to feel easy. Paths that seemed bumpy become smooth. What was a chaotic cloud of synapse fires is now arranged into strips of lights, leading the way. I know where I'm going. I can see it all. I'm on top of the world. Now 5 months into writing my first book, this is another one of my rituals. Sitting at a cafe on the 95th floor of the John Hancock Center, surrounded by camera-lugging tourists. I now have a grab bag of rituals like this: my nighttime research sessions with my whiteboard on the floor, the dark back room of Absento coffee, a glass of Malbec in the Kingsbury Street Whole Foods wine bar to cap off a day of working in the balcony, a discount massage at the massage school, followed by a writing session in a cafe strangely branded by a bank, a cup of Gyokuro green tea accompanied by 200 milligrams of theanine, and watching an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, followed by an Epsom salt bath, carefully monitored to be 20 minutes long at 107 degrees F. Each of these rituals has a purpose. At this point in the process, the purposes are shapeless and guided by feel, but the feelings these rituals follow are distinct. A breakthrough in writing this first book came when I discovered that getting writing done is about mind management, not time management. I also discovered that I didn't always have to match my mood to my work. I could also match my mood to my work. All I had to do was ask myself 3 questions. What kind of work do I need to do right now? What mood do I need to be in to do that work? And finally, when was the last time I felt that way? By thinking of the last time I was in my target mood, I could attempt to conjure up that mood again. I might try something and find that it didn't work, but then I'd quickly try something else. Eventually, I'd find some combination of place, activity, or substance to combine into a ritual that would trigger the mood I was looking for. Many of these rituals were meant to trigger relaxation, such as the glass of wine in the wine bar and the massage at the massage school. Because relaxation promotes creativity, that relaxation would then enable breakthrough writing sessions. I also began to associate certain places with certain moods. These moods promoted certain kinds of work. The dark back room at Absento Coffee was good for editing and refining my writing. The bank-branded cafe had lots of windows and was decorated in a bright orange motif. After a relaxing massage, I frequently found new, far-out ideas while writing in that cafe. And whenever I felt overwhelmed with everything I had to do, I'd grab my membership card and head to the top of the John Hancock Center, where I knew I'd get a fresh perspective. Several years after I developed this grab bag of rituals, Cal Newport released a groundbreaking book, Deep Work. Introduced the notion that there are different kinds of work, and those different kinds of work call for different moods and energy levels. There is shallow work, which doesn't require a great deal of focus and doesn't call for your best energy. And there is deep work, which is work that does require your best focus and your freshest energy. The term deep work quickly became commonplace amongst productivity enthusiasts. While writing my first book, I also began to notice patterns in the type of work I was doing and the mood that best suited that work. It went beyond deep and shallow. In fact, 7 different types of work, each with its own mood, eventually emerged. I came to call them the 7 mental states of creative work. The 7 mental states. My ritual 1,000 feet above the ground helped me see everything going on in my business as easily as I could see the layout of the city. A session in this mental state helped me create a plan, to decide what needed to be done, how I would do those things, and, just as importantly, what didn't need to be done. This is the first state, the prioritize mental state. I eventually recognized that my nighttime research sessions were much more than just research sessions. There were, in fact, 2 separate mental states I inhabited in these sessions. The very word research implies that you are searching again. You have some inkling or recollection of the way something is, but you have to look it up or run an experiment to be sure. Instead of looking for specific information, I was immersing myself in my source material. I even allowed myself to dive into an article or a book well outside my subject area. While studying typography, I delved into the history of metallurgy or learned about the Protestant Reformation. Research wouldn't be the right term for this second mental state. This second mental state is far less focused than research. Inherent in this mental state is the permission to not search for a specific answer to a specific question. This mental state calls for being attuned to your curiosity and not feeling guilty about wandering off course. The second mental state is the explore mental state. Yet sometimes I really was researching. I was searching for specific answers to specific questions I had in my mind. Questions I knew would be critical to how I would structure a chapter, or simply to getting the facts straight. For these cases, I was, in fact, in the third mental state, the research mental state. My morning writing session, both while writing this first book and later as I optimized my creative output in Medellin, was a time to do the work. It's when I created what would become my finished product. I was in the fourth mental state, the generate mental state. Once I had some writing done, it still wasn't ready to submit to my publisher. I had a rough draft from working in the generate mental state. In that generate mental state, I tied together what I learned while in the explore and research mental states. I fleshed out an outline I created while in the prioritize mental state. But now I had to take off the rough edges. I had to make sure the grammar was as good as I could make it, that the spelling was correct, and that any facts I was unsure of while writing were filled in. I had some of my best editing sessions in the dark back room of Ibsento Coffee. Somehow, that dark back room put me in the fifth mental state, the polish mental state. These 5 of the 7 mental states make creative work happen: prioritize, explore, research, generate, and polish. But none of these mental states are possible without the remaining 2 mental states. Unless you're lucky enough to have a full-time assistant, you're going to have some pesky details that need to be taken care of in your day-to-day. You need to change the strings on your guitar, invoice clients, or review legal documents. Outside of your business, you need to buy groceries, take care of family members, or change the oil in your car. In writing my first book, I had to contact copyright holders for permission to use their images in the book and do my usual monthly review of financial statements for my business. I also had to keep myself fed, keep my apartment clean, and make sure my bills were paid. When you're taking care of the details that make your creative work possible, you're in the 6th mental state, the administrate mental state. Finally, you can't be going non-stop all the time. You need the energy to do your work. To replenish that energy, you need to get a good night's sleep. You need to take time off, whether that's evenings, weekends, vacations, a sabbatical, or maybe just a coffee break. When I was writing my first book, these were the times I got a massage, watched a funny video, or took a hot bath. These rituals were relaxing, but I chose them strategically. I knew that if I did these things right now, they would make me more productive later. After a long day, I needed to refuel. I needed to spend time in the 7th and final mental state, the recharge mental state. These are the 7 mental states of creative work: prioritize, explore, research, generate, polish, administrate, and recharge. An easy way to remember them is to tell yourself per golf, par. Per stands for prioritize, explore, and research. The G at the beginning of golf stands for generate, and par stands for polish, administrate, and recharge. Per golf, par. These mental states work together like gears inside a clock. Sometimes they move, sometimes they stop and start, but they are so in sync with one another that the hands of the clock move forward smoothly. The 4 stages of creativity I talked about in the previous chapter are all about the progress of your project. How close have you come to reaching a final product? While the 7 mental states often match up with certain stages of creativity, they aren't so much about the state of your project. The 7 mental states of creative work are all about the mood you are in while doing the work. If you master working by mental state, your creative work will progress reliably through the 4 stages of creativity. Flavors of deep work. These 7 mental states tend to immediately make sense to people. At the very least, most people, if they haven't thought about it before, recognize that they aren't always in the same mental state when they're doing their work. In fact, Cal Newport himself recently told me that since writing deep work, he too started to notice mental states beyond deep and shallow. Cal told me the thing I learned after deep work came out, which is not really in the book but I think is important, is understanding that there are different flavors of deep work. Not just between different professions, but within your particular profession there could be different things that are deep. They feel different, and there's different things to support them. When Cal isn't writing books about thinking, he's doing a lot of thinking. He's a theoretical computer scientist and professor at Georgetown University. He told me that upon writing deep work, his understanding of deep work was solving theorems, but he said, "It became clear that there are other things I do that are just as deep and require just as much concentration, but they're supported by completely different behaviors. So, when I'm writing is very different from when I'm reading, or taking in ideas, or having a conversation with someone who's a subject matter expert, and I'm trying to build up my understanding so I can use that to develop new ideas. This is all deep work too, but it feels very different." You can see the 7 mental states in Cal's work. Cal's writing would be in the generate mental state. Reading, taking in ideas, and talking to an expert would be in the explore mental state, or the research mental state, depending upon whether Cal is trying to answer specific questions or merely satisfy his curiosity about the subject. Answering questions would be research. Satisfying curiosity would be explore. Cal also has ways of getting into the right mental state for each of his different flavors, as he calls them, of work. When he's solving a proof, he goes for a walk. When he reads, he has what he calls a whole arsenal of reading habits. When he reads at night, he does it in a big leather armchair. When he's reading about the philosophy of technology, he goes to a particular diner for an early lunch. There's another coffee shop he goes to for other types of reading. Sometimes he finds the reading he's doing is best accompanied by a beer. To begin using the 7 mental states, start with the big rock of the generate mental state and build around that. Experiment to find your creative sweet spot and build a habit out of using it in the generate mental state. From there, gradually experiment to identify the other mental states and be intentional about using them. Keep a journal to make observations about when you see these mental states in your own work. Throughout the day, ask yourself which mental state you're in and match your task to that mental state. Or, if you have a high priority task, ask yourself which mental state you need to be in to do that task. When was the last time you felt that way? See if you can replicate that mental state. Fuzzy borders. As you observe the 7 mental states in your own work, you will notice the borders between mental states are fuzzy. Work that appears to belong to one mental state may actually be better suited to another mental state. One of the fuzziest borders of all is that between generate and explore. Some work that seems like it should be done in the generate mental state may actually require the explore mental state. Choreographer Twyla Tharp starts every dance with a box. Anytime she comes across something that may inspire her in a project, she puts it in the box. For example, when she created the Broadway musical Movin' Out, the box was full of CDs and tapes. Twyla listened to all of Billy Joel's music and watched all of his performances, and she put it all in the box. It's obvious Twyla needed to review these CDs and tapes. The show was built around the music of Billy Joel, after all. But she didn't stop there. The box was also full of movies from the period of the Vietnam War and other books and movies from that same era. The box was also filled with notebooks covering various aspects of the process, things Twyla scrawled out as ideas came to her, news clippings from the era the show would be set in, and notes between herself and the music director. She also put in the box a green beret, a pair of earrings, a macrame vest, and photographs from reconnaissance trips she took in Billy Joel's hometown. Little of this made it directly into the show, but it was all there to inform her choices in dance, story, and costume. As Tharp herself said, "Everything is raw material. Everything is relevant. Everything is usable." Emphasis hers. Twyla found so much raw material for this show that by the time she was done, she had much more than just one box. She had filled 12 boxes. As Twyla was reviewing CDs and tapes, looking up old newspaper articles and watching movies from the era, she was clearly in the explore mental state. She had to be comfortable with not making visible progress through the 4 stages of creativity. Though she doesn't mention the 4 stages in her book, The Creative Habit, her own process mirrors the 4 stages in practice, and sometimes in language. As Twyla said, "The box is the raw index of your preparation." Emphasis added. Some things that went in the box could easily be interpreted not as explore, but as generate. Remember, exploration is a state of openness, of being comfortable with not making progress. Generation is the state of producing something. So you might be surprised to learn that the very first thing that went in the box for moving out was a videotape of Twyla dancing. She showed this video to Billy Joel when she pitched the show to him, which means that before she even officially began working on the show, she had already produced choreography. Now, was producing that choreography an act of generation or of exploration? The creation of that initial choreography was exploration rather than generation. Why does it matter? Because when you choose a mental state, you change the goals you have while producing the work, and the goals you have while producing the work will affect how you use your energy. If I'm sitting down to write in the generate mental state, my goal is to produce usable writing. There are two boundaries lying outside that goal of producing usable writing. Outside one boundary is producing perfect writing. Outside the other boundary is producing writing that has little hope of becoming a finished product. If I'm in the generate mental state, I have permission to stay within those bounds. I don't need to produce perfect writing, but I want what writing I do produce to be usable. I want to know that if I later go back over the writing in the polish or research mental states, I can have something ready to ship. This means there are imperfections I can accept from myself and imperfections I cannot accept from myself. If I'm unsure of how to spell something, if I'm unsure of the year something happened, or if I'm struggling with how best to word a sentence, it's okay. In these situations, I simply type something in brackets and move on. I know that the brackets will remind me to fix it later when I revisit the writing in the polish or research mental states. But if I'm writing, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm in the generate mental state. I keep a cheap portable word processor next to my bed. First thing in the morning, I have a habit. I grab the word processor while still in bed, and I write at least 100 words. Sometimes I write exactly 100 words. Other times I write more than 1,000, and when I'm done, I delete it all. Why would I delete it? Because the explore mental state is not the generate mental state. If I start a writing session in the explore mental state, my goals are completely different than they would be in the generate mental state. In the explore mental state, my writing doesn't need to be usable. I can write as loosely as I want. The goal of exploratory writing isn't to create something I can form into a final product. Rather, I'm merely exercising the thoughts in my mind. That's why I can delete the writing. I trust that the exploration I've done will resurface in some form at a later date. It's like practicing a sports movement, such as a golf swing. You don't need to record it and review your video for each stroke on the golf course. By practicing your swing, you're programming it into your memory, so you can later repeat the movement with little conscious thought. Imagine trying to produce choreography at the very beginning of a project, like Twyla Tharp did. If you approach the task in a generate mental state, that will result in a creative block. You'll second-guess every decision you make. You haven't done the necessary preparation to get shippable ideas. But if you approach it in an explore mental state, there's less pressure. You're free to try things that might not work. The process of creating becomes a form of preparation. Somewhere within that exploration will be the seed of an idea that makes it into the final product. There are other fuzzy borders amongst mental states, such as that between explore and research. When you're in the research mental state, you have a clear idea what you're looking for. If what you're looking for isn't so clear, approach your research in the more open explore mental state. Sometimes exploration can feel like you're in the recharge mental state. You might be reading something or viewing an exhibition that's so fascinating it replenishes your creative energy. Other times, while in the generate mental state, you might be thinking about a higher level plan about what you're creating, such as the availability of certain ingredients for a new recipe. You might be better off calling it the prioritize mental state. The mental state you decide to be in while doing a task is up to you, but be aware that approaching your work in the wrong mental state can cause a creative block. I find that the right mental state depends a lot upon the clarity of vision I have of the final product. If I lack experience and have an unclear vision, I'll need to spend a lot of time in the explore mental state. That will give me a chance to consider different approaches to unfamiliar problems. Likewise, if it's such a big project it's hard to picture in my mind, I'll need to spend more time in the recharge mental state. More on why in the next chapter. If I've done many similar projects before, I can plan out the whole thing in the prioritize mental state before I start creating. Stay in state. Switching mental states has costs, so once you're in a state, stay in that state. Once you activate one region of the brain, it can take a while before you have focused activation in another region of the brain. Like a filament light bulb slowly dimming after being turned off, electrical activity takes time to dissipate. Before I started working according to mental state, I switched mental states during my writing sessions. One moment I tried to come up with an idea to explain something. The next moment I tried to write some polished prose about it. The moment after that, I looked up a fact. It's no surprise I didn't get much writing done. Instead, I got blocked. Switching mental states made the blocks worse in two ways. One, it made me easily distracted. I didn't carve neural pathways for focus. I instead carved neural pathways for distraction. Two, it provided a convenient excuse to escape into those distractions. If writing got tough, I switched mental states. I surfed the web and did research. I woke up from an internet-induced coma 3 hours later with dozens of browser tabs open and no recollection of anything I had read. This created a vicious cycle. I felt bad for not making progress, then I continued to make no progress, then I felt even worse for not making progress, which didn't help me get any writing done. When I began working according to mental state, my productivity improved dramatically. I had deeper focus on the task at hand. By knowing what type of work I was doing, I could better settle into the right mental state. By knowing what type of work I was not doing, I limited the ways I could get off track. This is the hidden value of putting words in brackets while writing. Yes, it serves as a reminder that I need to look something up or brainstorm something, but it has another purpose. Creating a placeholder prevents me from switching mental states. It allows me to make the most of my creative energy while in the generate mental state. It also allows me to get more out of my energy when I go back over the writing in another mental state. When Paul McCartney was working on the unnamed song that would become Yesterday, he had a trick that effectively helped him stay in the right mental state. Remember from the previous chapter that as he was playing the melody for Friends, McCartney still didn't have lyrics for his song, so he used placeholder lyrics. The song wasn't called Yesterday, it was called Scrambled Eggs. The lyrics were so nonsensical, there was no way he was going to actually use them. Don't believe me? The first verse started, "Scrambled eggs, oh my baby, how I love your legs." Through trial and error, I developed my grab bag of rituals for various types of work. I adjusted my environment, changed my tools, or even changed what I drank according to the mental state I wanted to achieve. The tools for thought, the Slippy and the Grippy. I also chose my tools according to the mental state I was trying to promote. Some tools are Grippy, meaning they make it easy to stay on task. You can write with a pen and paper without distraction. Other tools are Slippy, meaning they make it easy to get off task. You can write faster on a computer than you can with pen and paper, but it's easy to get distracted. The downside of Grippy tools is, the grippier the tool, the less likely what you produce with that tool will become a finished product. The upside of Slippy tools is that if you can manage to stay on task with a Slippy tool, you'll produce your finished product faster than with the Grippy tool. Every tool you use has a symbiotic relationship with your abilities while using that tool. A chimp fishing for ants with a stick can't use her hand for another purpose while holding that stick. Whatever tool you use will make it easier to do some things while making it harder to do other things. For example, a laptop is a very Slippy tool for a writer. You can write prose very quickly, and you can quickly navigate between documents and applications. You can do research, stitch together writing from various places, or draw simple diagrams. But because the laptop is so Slippy, you can easily get distracted. You can get stuck surfing the web or fiddling around on social media. With a Slippy tool, you can quickly turn any thought into a finished product, but you can just as easily turn any thought into a path to distraction. By contrast, a notebook and pen is a very grippy tool for writing. Once you start writing in a notebook, there's no way for the notebook to distract you. There are no notifications, and you can't use it to look anything up. You can do lots of writing in a notebook, but you're unlikely to use that writing as a final product. It's best to be in the explore mental state when writing in a notebook. You're trying out ideas, but those ideas won't really come to fruition until you revisit them in a generate mental state, likely with a Slippier tool. If a tool is designed for a specific outcome, it can hit a sweet spot between Slippy and Grippy. The portable word processor I use for my morning writing habit is a good example. The Alpha Smart Neo is simply a keyboard with a cheap one-color LCD screen, the kind you would find on an old-school graphing calculator. The Alpha Smart is designed for writing, and writing only. It has a full keyboard. But the Alpha Smart has no internet capability, so there's no chance you'll end up surfing the web. You can write so easily on the Alpha Smart, it feels like a Slippy tool. But since that's all you can do, it's also quite grippy. The Alpha Smart is a good tool for staying within a mental state. You can only view about 4 lines of type on the screen at a time, which makes it difficult to do any editing. Even if you wanted to switch into the polished mental state, you would have a hard time. So you keep writing. I mostly use the Alpha Smart for exploratory writing sessions, where the writing is more about exercising the ideas in my mind and trusting that they'll resurface later. However, if I happen to capture some writing I don't want to lose, I can transfer that writing to my laptop via a USB cable. The USB cable transfer is one of many inconvenient things about the Alpha Smart, and that's the point. Sometimes you want a tool that can't do certain things so you can focus more deeply on the things you can do. You can't make a colorful oil painting with a pencil, but the limitations of a pencil reduce the number of factors you can worry about. You can't worry about color, and you can't worry about the character of brushstrokes on the completed canvas. A pencil will focus your mind on the shapes you're drawing and the overall arrangement of your composition. It's no wonder that for years before Vincent van Gogh used color in groundbreaking ways, he worked strictly in black and white. He mastered one aspect of painting before mastering another. Georgia O'Keeffe also focused on drawing in black and white early in her artistic journey, ignoring the color she had previously gone mad about. Writers don't have to buy a portable word processor to help them stay in the right mental state. You can enhance an existing tool so it encourages a mental state. I now do much of my writing on an external keyboard attached to my tablet. Switching applications on a tablet is more cumbersome than on a laptop. I'm unlikely to get stuck surfing the web, but it's also less convenient to look up reference material. It keeps me in the generate mental state. You can also purposefully limit the capabilities of a tool. My tablet is less distracting than it might be otherwise because I have rules about what my tablet is for and what it is not for. For example, I don't allow social media applications on my tablet. I also don't allow notifications. I use it only for a specific set of functions: reading, writing, and video chatting. You don't have to have device-wide rules to make such modifications. For example, some applications allow you to place restrictions on what websites you can visit during certain times of day. You can choose and adjust your tools according to the mental state you want to encourage, but you can also change your environment. I later learned that there were scientific explanations for why some settings in my grab bag of rituals were effective for certain types of work. Make the room work for you. Donald M. Ratner is an architect with a special interest in how our surroundings affect our creative thinking. In his book, My Creative Space, Donald draws from the field of environmental psychology to make recommendations on how to enhance creativity by altering your environment, whether that's the amount of space, the colors and shapes that surround you, lighting, or even your body position. I asked him if he could explain why my visits to the top of a skyscraper put me in the prioritized mental state. He introduced me to a concept called construal level theory. Donald says construal level theory states that the farther away you perceive an object, an incident, or an event, the more abstract, broad-minded, big picture, broad brush thinking mindset you get into. Construal level theory also explains why the back room at Ibsento Coffee was a good place for editing my writing. It was a small space with a low ceiling. Not only do you think big picture when you're in an open space, Donald told me you think small picture when you're in a small space. Generally, the threshold for ceiling height for generating ideas would be 10 feet or higher, whereas 8 feet and lower, you start to become more focused in your thinking, more analytic, more calculating, which of course is the mirror of creative thinking. Plus, the darker lighting turned my laptop screen into a sort of portal for my attention. The narrowing of my attention put me in a polished mental state. Donald added that another concept, called prospect refuge theory, is also consistent with thinking more openly while at the top of a skyscraper. Prospect refuge theory proposes that we're evolutionarily wired to be more comfortable when we can see out into our surroundings. Our ancestors who were able to seek habitats where they could see approaching danger had a better chance of survival. Donald said we're not expecting to be attacked in our own homes from behind by a wild animal, and yet our brains, because evolution moves so slowly, haven't caught up to the fact that we're now living in a modern-built environment. A recent study illustrates how prospect refuge theory can make us think bigger and more boldly. It found that stock traders working in the upper floors of a tall building took more risks than stock traders working in the lower floors of the tower. One way to create your own rituals for getting into the right mental state for the task at hand is change your environment. According to Donald, to be more creative, look for open spaces, especially with a view. To be more analytical, look for closed spaces. So for the explore, generate, prioritize, and recharge mental states, go for open spaces. For the research, polish, and administrate mental states, go for closed spaces. Noise level can also affect your ability to think creatively. Intuitively, we think it's best to work in a quiet environment, but when it comes to creativity, studies suggest that a background noise level of about 70 decibels is optimal for idea generation. But it has to be indistinct noise. If you can clearly understand a conversation happening next to you, that can be distracting. This is one of the benefits I've found of living in a country where people don't speak my native language. Unless I make it a point to focus on the cafe chatter around me, I understand very little. Your body position while you're working can also affect your mental state. Donald told me sitting is probably the least conducive position to being in a divergent mindset, but standing seems to help us not only in terms of creativity, but also productivity as well, which supports the recent standing desk craze. Donald adds that a second position that's good is reclining. Numerous writers and thinkers worked in bed, including René Descartes, Marcel Proust, and Edith Wharton. Frida Kahlo began painting seriously while bedridden from a bus accident. Truman Capote proclaimed himself to be a completely horizontal author, and Michael Chabon writes laid back in an Eames chair, his laptop resting on the kind of overbed table you might see in a hospital. But you don't have to stay in bed all day. Donald also says creativity and locomotion seem to go hand in hand. Taking walks, exercising, all of these things that get the blood flowing are almost always positive in terms of creative output. You can also combine a Grippy tool with locomotion. Donald suggests that transforming a wall into a whiteboard or chalkboard could get you into an expansive thinking mode. You can use your whole body while drawing on a wall, which would be good for the prioritize or explore mental state. This is what was great about having a big whiteboard on the floor during my nighttime research and exploration sessions. Donald says, if you want to think big, draw big. It's great if you can change your setting to suit your desired mental state, but you don't need complete control over your environment. If you can't escape from your office to your favorite cafe, you might be able to grab a conference room or find a place away from your desk to sit or stand, depending on the mental state you want to encourage. You can also make tweaks to your space without moving at all. When I first started on my own, I had a tiny bedroom at the end of a shotgun house in San Francisco. There were your own personal placebo. Even if experimental findings are helpful, ultimately, nearly any set of conditions can trigger the right state. In his book, The Art of Learning, chess champion and performance coach Josh Waitzkin describes how he helped an executive get into the right mental state for meetings. The executive said he most felt in flow when he was playing catch with his son. He wished he could feel that same way in his meetings. Instead, he felt distracted. Josh designed a series of cues for this executive to follow to trigger the right mental state for his meetings. Josh conditioned him to associate other cues with that flow state. He told the executive to play catch with his son every day. But leading up to playing catch with his son, he was to follow a routine. He ate a light snack, meditated, followed a stretching routine, then played catch with his son. While playing catch with his son, he listened to a Bob Dylan song. He followed this routine for a while, then tried performing it right before a meeting. It helped him get into the right state. Gradually, he compressed the routine, removing pieces, until he didn't need to do any of it to get into the right state for a meeting. He could merely think of the Bob Dylan song, and he would be ready. While playing catch triggered a flow state in the executive, not everyone would feel the same way. It was his personal experience and relationship with his son that made playing catch an effective cue. And it was through repeatedly chaining that cue with other cues that he was able to design a routine that got him into the desired state. Twyla Tharp has a stretching and weight training routine she does every morning. But to her, the routine doesn't begin at the gym. The routine begins when she stumbles out of bed at 5:30 a.m., puts on her clothes, and hails a cab. She knows that if she can get herself into that cab, she won't be tempted to skip a workout. Creative coach Mark McGinnis has a Japanese Star Wars mug at his desk. He knows that when he fills that mug with coffee and places it on his desk, it will put him in a mental state for writing. It's like novelist Nicholson Baker said, "You could say to yourself, from now on, I'm only going to write on the back porch in flip-flops starting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And if that feels novel and fresh, it will have a placebo effect and it will help you work." The rituals or routines that get you into the right mental state to do your work could be anything. To start building the right routines, start thinking about mental state. Ask yourself, what state do I need to be in to do this work? And when was the last time I felt that way? See if you can reverse engineer your way back into that state by recreating the conditions. Go to the same place, drink the same drink, and perform the same routine. If you can't return to the same setting, see if you can replicate the environment. Was the space expansive or closed? Was the lighting bright or dim? Focused or dispersed? Was it noisy or quiet? Once you've recreated the right mental state, try to stay within that state without switching to others. Pay close attention to the task at hand. Do you notice that some aspects of the task cause you to shift out of the mental state? Save those parts for another time. Remember that generation is different from exploration, that exploration is different from research, and that polishing your work too early can waste valuable creative energy. Remember that you'll be more focused if you set aside separate time to think about priorities, that administrative details don't deserve your best creative energy, and that you need to take time to recharge so you can replenish that creative energy. Keep your mental state in mind when you choose your tools and the level of development of your ideas. If you're still trying to think as creatively as possible, choose a Grippy tool that won't tempt you with distractions. If it's time to execute, choose a Slippy tool. For best results, modify that Slippy tool to be Grippy only for the task at hand. When you create according to mental state, a new world will open up. You'll have more energy to create things and more confidence in your ability to follow through. Your creative energy will no longer be wasted on haphazardly switching mental states. But you can do even more to make the most of your mental energy. You can go beyond adjusting your environment and your tools. Yes, your work progresses through the 4 stages of creativity more smoothly when you work according to mental state. But when you master how mental states cycle throughout time, you truly have a well-oiled creative machine.